Welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. This is the podcast where we help you challenge your mindset and discover where you are. Tired of stories about other people's success? We can help you change your life, determine your time freedom point, and join us on the journey to financial success. Let's go. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ideal Investor Show, where we bring you interesting people with lots of experience in the real estate space that has so many different facets. And today we have another one of those really cool people to join us, and that's Shannon Robnett.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
Hey, Shannon, great to have you. And I know that you're doing this stuff quite a bit and you've been around for a while, but for our audience, can you tell us a little bit, how did you get to where you are today? What's kind of the origin story behind it?
Well, I was literally born into this job. My father was a builder and a developer, and my mother was a third generation realtor. So I have my license. My son has his. So we've got 5 generations of realtors in our family. And, you know, I grew up at the table at dinner listening to my parents discuss things that sounded exactly like the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? Okay. And I didn't really realize what a blessing that was to sit there and listen to this stuff, because it wasn't until later in life that it hit me. But I started my companies at 21 years old, 29 years ago, and I started out building single family homes, and I found that I didn't really like homeowners. So I started in on the commercial space. I built city halls, police stations, fire stations, medical facilities, schools, gymnasiums, all of these kinds of structures, a lot of industrial. And every time I finished a job, I realized that I became unemployed. And so I started honing my skills, and I started finding some single investor to work with, whether it was a doctor, whether it was a high net worth individual, and we would build a project, and then we action on that business plan, and we would exit, and we would both make some money. And as that went along, I began to realize that I was quickly coming to a place where my deals were getting too big for a single investor. My last single investor deal was a 180 unit apartment complex with a family office. And after that deal concluded, I realized I needed to branch out, and I went into syndication. But my career has led to about $450 million in construction and development projects, of which we currently own and manage about 125 million in assets.
And when you say, so thanks for describing that, when you say own and manage, sometimes when people hear about syndication, okay, we get into something, either we build it or we renovate it, and the main goal is to hit a point where we can basically sell it again and reap the benefits. When you say manage, do you keep them longer than it takes for them to be stabilized?
We do. And there's different business plans that we look at depending on the asset, depending on the market, depending on a lot of variables. There are 3 types of investors. There's the investor that's looking for appreciation. They're typically people in their mid to late 20s, maybe early 30s, and they're looking to grow their wealth so that they could get to that place where cash flow on the existing asset carries them off into their golden years, and they don't have to work for anybody else anymore, right? Then there's the people in their late 30s to early 50s who are really hitting their stride in their business, and they have tax problems. They're making great money. That is not the problem. They're writing massive checks to the IRS, and they want to learn how to mitigate that. And mitigation is usually as good or better than any tax or any benefit from cash flow that they could get. And then the final one that we have is the one that is at the place in their life. They've got the net worth that they're looking for. They just would like to get a 6 or a 7% return on that from here until the day they put them in the ground. And those kind of people are looking for that long-term investment where they're not constantly getting in and out and having to think about another deal and this and that. They're really looking to just place the money and hold it. And so we use those different groups to do different syndications and different aspects of the syndication. And so in doing that, we're able to maximize what the investor is needing in that place in their life to get them the return that they're looking for based on getting them to the next step of the real estate journey.
Yeah, that's very good. And thank you so much for describing those 3 groupings. I can only concur. I see exactly the same groupings, even if the approach is not necessarily super stringent that you can only be in like syndication, or you can only be in multifamily, or you can only be in like accumulating individual investment properties or whatever. But the groupings, I think, are perfectly described. Before we hit the record button, we also talked a little bit about when within the development of a project you typically bring in investors. So can you take those three groupings and describe for anybody interested in syndication investment when they would actually kind of become a limited partner in your deals?
Yeah. So if you think about development, the the key to development is maximizing the value in the shortest period of time, because you are creating the original value add, right? Everybody talks about, I want to buy this building, I want to redo it, I want to improve it, I want to increase the rents, I want to add value. Well, we literally take bare ground, nail the sticks and stones together, put the tenants in there and create that value. And in that, we look at most of our appreciation investors get in at that point, because we're going to exit when the building is complete and stabilized and has had the maximum gain that it's going to have. In that, there's no tax benefits, right? Because you're not necessarily going to hold it long term. You're not getting any of the 45L program. You're not seeing any of that, but you're seeing the largest increase in your capital in the shortest period of time. And then we look at maybe bringing in, either selling it to another group or selling it to another syndication at fair market value between the two groups, and bringing in the cash flow investor that wants to hold a new asset long term. And I'll give you a couple reasons why a new asset, in my opinion, is better than buying something and renovating it or rehabbing it or doing that. There's a couple of reasons. Number one, when you look at in a typical large scale apartment complex, your expenses are typically running 36 to 40% expenses to income, because there's always a furnace breaking down. There's always a roof that's leaking. There's a pipe that's breaking. And that's typical of older units. When we build brand new, number one, we have warranties that are in place. We have a brand new 30-year roof. We've got brand new landscaping, brand new parking lots, and our expenses run between 28 and 32%. And so we're able to harvest more profit. The other one that I think is very, very important is when you're building brand new apartments, your demographic is different. And if you look at the class D and C apartments, those guys are really being affected right now by inflation, and adding $50 or $100 to their rent is creating massive delinquencies in the market as we see it today. And so we look at that and we say, hey, you know what? We don't really want to deal with that, but they're paying 35 to 42% of their rent. Where if you look at the class A apartments, they're paying 26 to 29% of the rent. So they're choosing to live there probably based on location, probably proximity to amenities, proximity to their job, and they have more disposable income and are less likely to be in a situation where a $50 special down the street causes them to move.
Right, understood. And when you say 26 to 29%, you mean of income, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So they're paying much less of their total income toward their rent, even though the rent is more.
Okay, cool. Now, as far as just in general, I'm just kind of curious, because this is on that scale that you're operating in. This is not an area that we're in, so I always like to learn a little bit. For people like that actually afford the rent for the place, they are not quite in that middle group yet, or in that third group that you mentioned, where it's basically a matter of sustaining the purchasing value of their money. How likely is, or how much of an issue is potential turnover when they see, I don't know, I'm paying like 2,500 right now, and for 3,000 I could move into a house? Is that a point, or are they typically in their life not yet there to actually only use an apartment as a transitional thing?
Well, especially right now, Axel, you cannot put those two, rent versus own. They're not $500 apart, right? The project that we have going right now, we have a 1,500 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, single car garage townhome. That rents for about $2,200 a month. Right. 1 mile away from that is a local entry-level builder who has that same house with a 2-car garage that you can own for $460,000. At today's interest rates, that puts that price point on that house at about $3,800 with all your mortgage and insurance and everything. So when you really look at the math will tell you that you could have $1,700 a month to invest in something. And we know for a fact by looking at the amortization schedule, you're not getting $1,700 in value in paying down your mortgage. And if you compare it to typical appreciation rates of 3%, which is the historical average over the last 40 years, you're not going to get that in the first 8 years of owning that house. You're not going to get anywhere near creating the same value as if you just put that $1,500 a month into a Vanguard fund.
Right, I get it. So actually, in a cheeky comment, I would have to say, with that argument, we would want to have interest rates stay where they are, right?
I wouldn't disagree with you too much. And if you look at it, Axel, I've been doing this for 29 years. The interest rate market that we're in now is still one of the best markets I've seen. Obviously, 19, 20, 21, 22 were fantastic, but I think they were a once in a lifetime event. And people that are waiting for that to happen again are probably going to be waiting a very, very long time.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that we're going to see this near zero prime, and then you have basically like 0.5 to 3.5% as the owner occupant. I'm thinking it is realistic to hope for a 5 handle or something like that sometime in the future. So
yeah,
but
I definitely would agree with you.
Yeah, so but I mean 2.5% is obviously a big chunk, especially if you need, like, take your example with the $400,000 house. That makes a quite substantial difference. So that's really nice. I just wanted to ask this because sometimes people say, well, in these larger scale apartment complexes, you have a hell of a turnover and stuff like that. And I think you gave a really good argument why, at least for right now, that's really not the case. And then obviously, you can also charge a little more because I'm sure people appreciate that they live in a brand new place versus something that's like 30, 40, 50 years old and renovated.
Well, the other thing too, we've got a generation of people in their mid 30s and under that really have lost the enamor of home ownership. They financially don't have the understanding that home ownership is a good idea. They like the amenities that they get with the large scale apartment complexes, the gyms, the pools, the play areas, the dog parks. All of those kinds of things are very, very attractive to them. And then they are able to spend their free time not doing yard work, not replacing windows and painting houses. They're able to spend that doing what they want. And so there's a lot of that that's happening now where people are just changing lifestyles. And also our younger generation is much more transient. So taking a job in Chicago for a couple of years, moving down to Tulsa after that is definitely, people move a lot more now than they did in the historic past.
Yeah, I hear you. And I agree with that. I mean, the other part is, even though you said that the percentage of income that they use for rent is lower, but when you add the percentage of income they need for student loans, and
Correct.
if you add those two together, they might actually, even if interest rates were lower, might have a hard time qualifying for anything if the, income to debt ratio is at like 40 or 45. And for some strange reason, at least most of the time when people in our community apply that are younger, that the student loans are basically seen as if they were credit card debt, right? In a sense, they basically say, okay, well, this is like a weekly or monthly expense, and it's the same like your car loan, or it's the same like your rent, versus now how much mortgage can we approve you for? And obviously, that's another thing for that generation that has really, in my opinion, gotten completely out of hand.
It definitely has.
Yeah. So those are all good arguments to do. Now, from those three groupings that we started out with, and I mentioned before we hit the record button that our community is mainly interested in cash flowing assets. Can you describe a little bit the benefits of, if somebody says, okay, I'm in that third group, how beneficial or what the benefits are of doing parking, so to speak, for longer term in a syndication?
I had a conversation yesterday with a gentleman who had, through the BRRRR strategy, was making very good income, and over the last 5 years has accumulated 100 single family properties, basically in 3 geographical locations in the United States. And even though he had professional management on those, he still had a lot of work to do. He still had insurances to put on the property. He still had, all of his entities to manage. He still had a lot of things to do. And he was really trying to consolidate that. And he figured in that time period, he had accumulated about a $5 million net worth through the equity and everything that had been created over the last 5 years. But he really wanted to simplify that and give himself back more free time. And the beauty of doing that in the syndicated model is that you are not having to be the professional. A lot of people, they get involved with real estate because they see the massive benefits. They understand the wealth building capacity that real estate has, but they make really good money doing what they're doing. And they're really buying another job, right? There's more things to do. A lot of people self-manage. Even with that, there's still things you have to pay attention to, unexpected expenses, out of pocket all the time. And in the syndicated world, in my business, we take care of all that. And you're partnering with someone that does this full time and is a 30-year veteran in that field. So really, I would hope that we have more expertise than you do in that area because we are that specialist. And I have a lot of people that partner with us in the syndications that are doctors or lawyers. They make $300 an hour doing what they do. Why would they then want to take on a job of $60 an hour to manage their properties or to deal with this or to find the new project or develop this or chase all of that stuff? And so we find that what we offer is a lot of simplicity. And the other thing that you look at too, Axel, is if you have a fourplex and you have one person move out, you have 25% vacancy. It is really hard in a large scale multifamily operation to get to 25% vacancy, especially all of a sudden. And when you think about that, you've got a lease that renews, the guy chooses to move out, the gal chooses to move out. All of a sudden, you've got this massive vacancy that could last 1-2 months. But in a large scale project, you're hedging your bets better because you're putting yourself in a situation where you have 10 people move out this month. Of the 200 that are in there, it's still only a 5% vacancy. And so you're able to manage that. You're able to see indicators much more quickly or much more clearly, and they take longer to become problems. Then you add the scale of having a full-time on-site manager, a full-time handyman, economies that go with that, large carpet purchases, those kinds of things, large contracts with vendors, all of those kinds of things that provide pricing benefits that allow for smoother operations, more professional operations, and less time from the limited partners. In fact, no time from the limited partners.
Thanks for that explanation. I mean, one thing that I always harp on, and that's what we do in our system, is basically we're working together with basically a similar organization like yours when it comes to scale. The only difference I would say is like the turnkey providers that we're working with, for example, they have like 800 units under management. The fact that most of these units are single family or duplexes is one component of it. But all the things you just managed is basically the reason to work with them. They have renovation teams. They don't need to call the plumber in town. They have people on staff and stuff. When you get to a certain scale, that obviously helps, and they like do 100 units a year. If somebody wanted to do something similar but without a syndication, it would be in connection with somebody that has that scale and not just do it all yourself. Now, one thing you mentioned, this example of the person that accumulated that $5 million portfolio. Are there any, because you're the expert, if somebody that were to say, okay, I really want that simplicity, I really want that kind of professional handling, I want less time in managing my own portfolio, is there something like a 1031 similar process, or would they have to take a huge hit if they liquidate their portfolio and then invest the money into you?
Well, it's really funny you asked that because that's exactly the plan we were putting together for him. And so what we looked at was we looked at a way for him to exit in his best interest. One of the things that probably a lot more, I know that in his case, he was finding that the retail value of the house was higher than the rental sale of a portfolio, right? He had 20 houses in a particular city, and he was talking about selling that as a portfolio. Well, another investor is going to want a better deal than if he sold all 20 of them one at a time. Right. And yet what we looked at, creating what I would call a succession plan for him that says, okay, let's group these up. Let's figure out which have got the rents that or the leases that are expiring. Let's put together a plan and move that money in a tax efficient way, because it's a shame to create $5 million in wealth and pay $1 million in taxes to the IRS because you don't plan ahead. And so we're in the beginning processes of putting something together. And the way that that would work is they would 1031 into particular assets on a particular schedule that would allow them to move that in a manner that makes sense. And so it's the beginning of a conversation. But I think the thing I like most about my job, Axel, is I get to solve problems. And this is a problem that keeps the government's sticky hands out of another guy's wallet. And so I think I like those problems to solve the best.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I had heard, I'm not 100% sure because obviously you're the expert. I'm only the host of this podcast in this case, that there is a way that you can do 1031 exchange. The tricky part could become, if you're not in group 3, if we go back to the 3 groups that you mentioned, where you anyway invest in something and it is already there and it's running and it's managed, it's generating cash flow. So you're not really under any kind of pressure that when that syndication ends, what do you do then? Because one thing that I believe I have learned is it's not so easy to roll from one syndication into the other in a 1031 kind of way. So the initial transition, I'm sure it is not as easy, especially if you want to slow to medium speed liquidate a larger portfolio. But then when let's say those say 4 million would be transferring because the rest is mortgages and expenses and stuff, when you have them in the syndication, then it should be probably one, I'm asking this in a sense, that you have for the longer term, because if it's only like 5 to 7 years, then you have the problem again, right?
Well, you do, but what you've done is you've taken 100 problems and you've made them 3. Right. And one of the other things that we do in our syndications, Axel, is when we come to the end of it, I feel that my job is to create relationship with my investors, get to know what they're looking for. And it's also my job to offer them other opportunities when this one ends. And so what we look at is, hey, we either have, this opportunity or this opportunity. When this one ends, we've got an opportunity and a place for you to go. Or what we have done in the past is we drop people out of the syndication because the 1031 is in the name of the entity. So if we have this big syndication and we're going to call it Axel and Shannon Syndication, and there's 25 of us in here, and 20 of us want to go to the next deal, but 5 of us don't. About 3 days before closing, we would remove them from the LLC, and we would give them their shares individually or in a name they want to use. We would keep a power of attorney so that we could sign, because now we have to sign for 6 people at the closing, but we would keep a power of attorney so that there's not any complications with the closing. And then you would be able to do your own 1031 and go your own direction. And so it's really kind of easy if you're planning ahead. If it's kind of a last minute thing, it probably looks like running into a chicken coop and everything's going crazy.
And I mean, I have oftentimes wondered if it would actually be possible, because I'm actually an advocate to hold individual properties, obviously on a much smaller scale, in dedicated land trust LLCs, basically, where you have the LLC that owns the land trust and that owns the property. So with something set up like that, I've always wondered if it wouldn't be possible that LLC could basically be the owner of the shares, and when the shares be returned, it's still the same LLC, and you could get something else. Like
absolutely.
I can only speak about my experience. Maybe yours is similar or different, but I've seen many people who have understood real estate is a good thing, started buying something, and nobody ever told them that when they do it in their own name, they've exposed themselves to a huge risk, especially when the portfolio grows, right? Like if you're way above that level, but even that guy that you mentioned with a 5 million net worth, and some tenant in one of his properties says, oh, the staircase was wrong and it's his fault, and the court says, yeah, it is his fault, 5 million award. If it's in his name, it would all be gone, right? So
right. And I love seeing the community that you've created, because I've created a brand called the Intelligent Investor, because I find that so often people come in and they learn something about real estate, and then they just hyper focus on that one thing that they've learned, and they miss out on so many other nuances like this, like tax protection, like all the different aspects that you can find in real estate that then can broaden your horizons, and you can learn from that. And that's another thing that I love about the real estate community, especially with people like yourself, Axel, who are putting out information that allow people to understand that they don't have to be an expert. They can plug into a community. They can get that advice from their fellow investors, and they can become a more intelligent investor and protect themselves and the wealth they've created.
Thank you for putting it that way. And we're trying our best to educate our investors, not just about the investment, but overall, what are the impacts to their life. I find it sometimes a little comical, right? Like if somebody were to say, oh, hey, I have this great idea and I want to create a business. Yeah. And if it's growing substantially, anybody would get advisors to say, how do I protect this business from all kinds of crap coming in from the outside? But strangely, at least my impression, when you do real estate investing, at least initially for most people, they, like you just said, focus so much on the investment itself and not on all the other aspects, even though if you think about it, we're talking about really substantial amounts of money, right? Like for a regular person to build over years, a $5 or even $10 million portfolio is not that outrageous, even if you have a reasonably normal job, right? So,
and what you just described is a lot of the reason why people join syndications, because in our professional capacity, we've done all these things. We're connected with these kind of advisors. We've got the tax help you might need. We've got additional resources. We've got self-directed IRA people that can help with changing your 401k from your last job to an IRA and then self-directing it into real estate. We've developed a lot of those contacts with the people in the industry that can provide that information, that service, and that education. And again, that helps people to grow because they're not forced to grow right now because they have a property under contract and they need to explore all this stuff and they need to figure out what the tenancy is and they need to figure out what their expenses are going to be. And oh, by the way, throw in an LLC. And what about cost segregation? How do I get with that? And then, my gosh, do I really have the right insurance? Am I working with a guy that's really taking care of me? And am I properly insured? And there's just 1,000 questions. And I think people get to the first 10, they answer those and they feel really good and they stop.
Yeah, exactly. And that was a beautiful bridge, Shannon. I have to give you that one. So either they come to me and I help them, or if they want to come to you, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, you know, the easiest way to get a hold of me is just at shannonrobnett.com. You can see my social media there. You can see the deals that we've done in the past. You can actually even get an appointment on my calendar. We can talk further about what we might be able to do to help you, whether it's just education. We've got a ton of that information, or whether you want to talk more about your involvement in what we do. All of that's available at shannonrobnett.com.
Awesome. Okay, that's great. So final question, totally unrelated, is if you could meet anybody, Shannon, past or present, who would it be and why?
You know, I think in this day and age, with where the world is at right now, I would probably want to meet Thomas Jefferson and see what they really intended for this country to be. Because I think the idea of America is a fantastic idea, the liberties that we were given. I just don't think we interpret them the same way as what they did. And I'd like to see what the founding fathers thought.
I would continue that sentence, thought about, and then give them a few examples of what we
I don't want to scare them. I mean, they're already dead, but I don't want to kill them again.
Yeah, no, I know, but I'm with you because I find it's aggravating, to be honest, that certain things are interpreted in ways to the point of putting words in people 270 or 250 years ago without recognizing what kind of an environment they were in. It's
just think about our tax code, right? I mean, we didn't have a lot of that back then. In fact, that was the thing they were fleeing, was taxation in England and everything. And now they would look at the taxes we have, and we have the taxes on fuel and the taxes on houses and property and use and, you know, taxes on everything.
Definitely. I mean, I'm in the context of our real estate discussion, one thing that I would ask, how much did you think of land available for development of any kind be by the government? Right? I mean, if you look at the United States compared to any other place in the world and how much is government-owned land, when we go back to the time when they were basically telling everybody, go west and stake your claim, somewhere said...
Obviously, the government beat us there.
I mean, it hampers so many things. I know, like from previous conversations I listened to that you had with other interviews, where you say it takes even in progressive locations, progressive for development locations, 4 years to even get the shovel in the ground.
Yeah.
You know, that wasn't when the people started moving west that they needed 4 years before they could stake a claim, right? And so those would be the kind of things that when you go, I would ask you here, please ask them what they think about that.
Exactly.
All right. So ShannonRobnett.com is where people can get you. Thank you so much for being here and having this vivid conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alex, again, thank you for creating a community that people can come to, where they can find information, where they can grow and they can learn at whatever level they're at. I really commend you for putting the time and effort into that.
Yeah, awesome. I think we are sitting in the same boat, rowing in the same direction.
I would hope so.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.